Hi there. Welcome to HLS Modern Workplace Talk, and I'm your host, Michael Giannotti. I'm an HLS, or Healthcare and Life Sciences, technical specialist focusing on Microsoft Teams for Microsoft's Healthcare and Life Sciences group. If you ever have questions for me, like today's one that we're going to answer, you can go ahead and find me and my colleagues out at aka.ms/HLS-blog. That's aka.ms/HLS-blog. So onward. So today we're going to be talking about file share migration. And today's question actually comes to us. There's a challenge posed by a follower on Twitter. His name is George. That's all I'm going to say. And we'll be getting into that. But what we're going to talk about today is this. First, we're going to cover the challenge. Then we're going to cover some areas of food for thought I have around this subject. I have some pretty strong opinions. You may have different ones, and it's okay. But I'm just going to share mine out here because they're ones that I've worked with customers in the past. I've seen them be implemented. They've been successful. They're not all originally mine. Some of that's come about by experience, feedback from the customer, etc. But we'll go through that. And then my final take on a good approach to taking your files from on-premise in a file share and moving them up into the Office 365 cloud. So, first of all, the challenge, right? This is what was presented to me on Twitter. So I'm going to go ahead and read right here. And he said, at Giannotti, that's my Twitter handle if you haven't figured that out, I'm migrating the staff share to SharePoint Office 365. The current structure of the shared drive is that each department has its own folder. In SharePoint documents, would you recommend using a single library, or would you recommend creating a library for each department? I had a brief little response, and he followed up and he said, look, we're talking about a mile deep of folders with pretty complex permission structures. I'm trying to implement more use of search and tagging rather than too many folders, but it's literally getting people to unlearn everything that they've ever done before with computers. Thanks. So that's quite a challenge. And the thing is, George, and for anybody out there who's feeling the same, like, wow, that really resonates with me. The reason why it resonates is it's very common, right? File shares have been out there forever. So what are some of the things that we want to think about as we're walking through a possible approach to dealing with those? So a couple of things. Number one, all file share folders are not the same. So in this case, George had mentioned that in his file share ones, they had departmental. They were broken up by that. But even within that, I would dare to say you're going to find a mix, because if it's very deep, what we tend to see is, first of all, as people have trouble finding information because it's not easily navigable, searchable, and all that stuff, and they don't want to go there, they like to have a folder that they go to. So what do? They create their own, right? A personal folder within there. And then within that, they copy lots of stuff from other folders, right? And subfolders and all that stuff. And so we have all this stuff taking place within there, within people's individual stuff, where they're like hoarding that information unto themselves, right? So you're going to probably see a mix of some of that. Number two, when we talk about that department, even within the department, there's various groups and teams who, again, have created their own folders and folder structure that they're copying content, right? They may be getting replicated across many, and they're hoarding, again, information that's there. Then finally, there tends to be within, any of these departmental ones, folders that we refer to as kind of an application, right? It may actually contain a quote-unquote application, like an Access database, Excel spreadsheets that are handled like applications that people need, that are absolutely business critical for them. Or it might be handling records management around projects and different things that groups are doing. So a whole range of different folders and files. It's not one monolithic thing. They're all departments. Within those departments, we typically see a variety of subfolders, and then their structure that gets resonated out. Next, Some other thing to keep in mind as we're looking at this is that, they really are a dumping ground, file shares. People, as they copy and copy, they'll move, they'll create folders called old and years and dates, and they just dump stuff off to keep their primary areas looking more pristine. But meanwhile, it's a dumping ground, right? And they may not even do that kind of an organization. It just may become a dumping ground. Many years ago, when I didn't work for Microsoft, I was a corporate systems architect for a very large financial services org. And I remember they did an audit of all their file shares, and they found close to 80% had not been, of the files out there, had not been touched in 5 years or more. That's a problem. That means there's a bunch of just old junk out there. And unless there's a requirement around compliance to bring that stuff forward, that's something that we want to think about in our approach. The next thing we want to think about again is, and I mentioned this, unnecessary replication of files. As we create folder structures, right? I got a department. Now within there, I have some different groups, and then they create their stuff. People keep grabbing copies of that because file shares are just not, they're just not navigation friendly, right? It's not like a website or where I click some quick filters and get just what I want. It becomes this nested nightmare of stuff that's hard to find. So we continue to replicate and blow out the storage. Something we want to think about as we approach and tackle what we're going to do with these files as we move them forward. So that's important to keep in mind, and it has a lot of bearing on the approach that I advocate, and that George actually hinted at he'd like to do, but feels constrained. Finally, migration is the time to address issues manifested in file shares. This goes back to how George had mentioned, and I hear this all the time. Look, I know we'd like to take a different approach. We'd like to do this and this, but there's always a million buts, reason why we can't. If you don't do it, especially during a migration, you never will. So, the sins of the past or whatever, the issues and the problems created in the past are going to continue to replicate, and they're just going to surface and manifest in new ways as you move forward. When you are migrating, if there is any time to be the hamster that gets off the wheel, takes a look around, assesses the situation, and says, look, this is what we're going to do. Let's put the brakes, slow things down. And I understand oftentimes, there is a movement because there's executive decisions and things that are being passed down. I'll talk about that in just a bit, but this is the time to do it. You need to if there's a time to make the break, to re-educate your users, to provide a path forward, and a lot of things can be done in the process that I'm going to talk about to remediate some of the issues you might encounter here, but this is really the time to do it. So I want to really encourage, as people are looking at it, migration time, when you're migrating and moving stuff, that really is the time to address the issues that you've had in the file shares and to really put a stop on that. So what's my take? Well, first thing is, what did I have here? Oh, make. I forgot what I wrote here. All right, so taking a step back, I'm now remembering my bullet points. I made them all fancy, and I'm like, wait a minute, what? Make. The first thing is make it manual, all right? Now, for the most part, and I want to kind of say what I mean here. So when you're looking at a migration up to the, from file shares to the cloud, there are many things. There's applications, there's stuff in SharePoint on-prem and other things that you're going to move up that make sense for it to be automated or handled by IT and done for your users. When we're talking about your departmental file shares, though, don't do that. There is some exceptions. I'll hit on that, but they should absolutely be the exception. So the approach that I have seen, and I've worked with many customers on this, the original inception for this was when It first was SharePoint and going from file shares to on-prem SharePoint, where people wanted to take advantage of some of the things around e-discovery, search, and all that within SharePoint native on-prem that they didn't have in their file shares. Auto expiration of content, a bunch of things that were not being handled in the file shares. But making it manual is huge. You train your users, right? I have educate and publicize. You're going to train your users. You're going to say, look, we're going to set up, this is around that education and publicizing. We're going to set up a timeline. And we're going to say, I'm going to throw dates out there, and then I'll talk about changing them. But the first thing is, hey, we're going to educate you on how to move files from the file share, from your departmental ones, right, up into the cloud. And we're going to educate you where stuff should go, because one thing that was mentioned was SharePoint Online. Well, maybe it's not SharePoint Online, right? It could be a matter of maybe it's something that's a departmental thing that's wide open for everybody for discussions. Maybe it's Yammer. Maybe it, instead of just being regular SharePoint, it's more appropriate in Teams. So first of all, there needs to be kind of an assessment as to the types of content that you have in these departmental file shares and where it should go. If it is collaborative in sharing in nature, I would say 90% of it goes to Teams, or more than 90%, right? It's still SharePoint under the hood, but it goes to Teams. If it's more application, records management, just publicizing of that content and making it available, then yeah, absolutely SharePoint, right? But you need to assess them and then educate them on where the content goes, how to move it, and then publicize timelines. For example, and this is where it'll start to make sense. You have 3 months until we turn, you say from such and such date, let's say it's, what's today? I don't even know. Let's say it's July 15th. I don't know, 15th, 16th. July 16th. And you have 3 months from today until the file shares become read-only. What's that do? You've put a line in the sand, number one. They're no longer going to be able to add content to the file shares 3 months hence. You've educated them on how to move the content, right? So that they're going to start to do that. Then you're also going to publicize it, and you're going to do it on a weekly basis. Send reminders, countdown. Dun, dun, dun. You could do it daily, but it'll just become noise. But at least a weekly, right? Where you're going to say, T minus 30 days, T minus 20 days, whatever the case is, until such time that it becomes read-only. And you're going to remind people. You'll have in those reminders pointers to the educational content, which, by the way, as you're educating, take a look at our post about going ahead and instantiating a learning pathways site and the stuff that you can do in there to educate and customize the things. So you could create custom content using PowerPoint recording like I'm doing here that educates users on how to move content. A lot of stuff you can do around that and that they can continue to refer to. But you're going to go ahead, educate them, publicize the timeline. 3 months from the announcement until it becomes read-only. Now, what does that mean? I can no longer work in the file shares, but if I have been slothful in my approach, which a lot of people are, right? They don't until the last minute, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? No, you're okay because it's read-only. Now you've put a whole, a freeze on those file shares, but people can still get to their content, copy it, and pull it up to where it needs to go if they were remiss. Then you begin the second phase countdown, which is the same amount of time. If you did 3 months, in 3 months hence, these file shares go bye-bye, no more file share. So you've brought that moment of crisis, oh my goodness, we can no longer work here, so that those who didn't move start to move. And then you give them an additional 3 months until the stuff goes bye-bye. You're probably going to have it backed up and archived somewhere for a set period where you can do a chargeback model or some other thing if somebody still hasn't gotten off the stick. But here's the catch to all that. Because you made it manual, because you put the onus on the owners, right? You taught them how to do it, the best ways to do it, to make it available. Then, as they move content up, you also retrain them. What's a better way? I don't know, tagging content instead of folders, having some baseline metadata tags so that then you can do filtered views, more of a flat view. You're not going to have all that replication of data, okay? Where you have security constraints, sure, put a folder or something there. But other than that, all that other stuff that took place within that bucket, have them start tagging, teach them how to do that, right? Teach the person how to fish. So they're going to move all the content, but by having them manually do it, remember what I said about it's a dumping ground. There's probably a lot of junk. People don't want to do more work than they have to. Nobody does, right? Nobody wants to do extra. Oh yeah, I'd like to do a bunch of extra just point and clicking until I'm ready to fall over. No, they're going to go ahead and they're going to only grab the stuff they need to. And again, if you've archived that and back it up and archive it in cheap file storage, you can maintain it for a long time frame in case there's something around compliance or whatever needed for retrieval. But the point is, now you're starting fresh. You're bringing over that which they need, not what you don't. Which, if you migrate for them, you're bringing it all, because you're not going to manually go through and evaluate everything across all those yourselves. So you're going to have this big mess. So you're going to go ahead, make it manual for the most part. If there are applications identified that we talked about, right? Those spreadsheets and some of those other things, work with your businesses to go ahead and identify those, and you can handle that, moving it, putting it in the appropriate place and where it should be. Maybe you're structuring a team around the application, right? Or it could be SharePoint, but you're going to be able to take on those pieces for migration that are truly important, mission critical. You'll bring those. The other stuff, put the onus on the users. Make sure you back up so that when you turn it all off, you have that for compliance sake, at least for a specified time period. And finally, they're not going to bring all the junk. Last thing is this. As you're doing this, you should have a team with a formal plan, again, that you publicize, publish out to your users, make it known. But as a part of that, you need an executive sponsor. And that sponsor should be, I don't have one with me, it should be the Hammer. So the person who is the executive sponsor needs, now they may be liked, respected, and all this other stuff, but the importance of the Hammer is this. When you post it out, you have them make the primary announcement. You can write it all up and just have it go out under their email banner or however you're going to publicize this. But by having that sponsor buy in and sponsor this move forward, that's going to eliminate a lot of the chatter and pushback and other things that you might get, because everybody's an exception. We're all special. No, you don't understand. My stuff is special. It needs to be treated this way. Really? Okay, right? It's not. No, I'm sorry. I talk to people all the time who go talk about, well, we're different. We handle, I talk to hospitals a lot. You don't understand in our environment, when in point of fact, there are things that are very vertical, industry-wise in nature, but there's a lot more that's horizontal across all that people never take into account. And when we're talking about a file share migration, that's about as horizontal as things get, right? Yeah, the application-specific stuff, which you're going to handle, that is different. But the rest, it's still the same, right? It's users copying and pasting and creating and leaving dumping grounds and all that. That happens everywhere, and it's happening in every departmental folder, and everybody wants to be exception. But who cuts through the exception? The Hammer. And so the Hammer can deal with that, and they can talk to the Hammer, talk to the hand, talk to the Hammer, the fist. And then if they determine, now, and that's why you want them to be a Hammer, somebody who has the juice to make it happen, who when they say this is happening, or I hear you, I hear you, yeah, I empathize with you, too bad, right? And then they can make a truly determined determination that if somebody comes with a real special exception, that it's going to be handled, but it should be handled as the exception, because the Hammer is known to be the Hammer, and people respect the Hammer Nobody wants to get hit by a hammer, right? So make it manual. That my recommendation is this: as you're doing it, make it manual. Try to flatten those structures as much as possible where security is a context. Hey, if you're doing it in the terms of teams and not just a bunch of folders in SharePoint, right? Teams, it naturally is secured based upon the team structures. But make it manual, have people, move that content themselves, and then where you need to get involved, get involved. Educate and publicize timelines. I highly advocate your timelines could be compressed, extended, like I gave the 3-month and 3-month. I knew an org that did 6 and 6, but they had a couple of 100,000 users when they did that, but they did 6 and 6, and they handled it that way. They eliminated all sorts of file shares by doing the 6 and 6 and having a hammer, an executive sponsor who had the juice to make it happen. So just some food for thought as we're talking through all this. It's kind of my take on this. But file share migration, I am not a big advocate on that wholesale automated, let's move everything up and blah, 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 blah. I'm a big advocate personally of if there was ever a time to take a step back, to educate, re-educate, to train, and then to take corrective action, this is it. Because the file shares are a mess. I don't know anybody's file shares that are not uncompliant. Just because of the nature of them, people copy and pasting all the time. So take the time, do yourself the favor. It doesn't take a lot of work to set this up. You need to get a hammer, you need to get a small team together to agree on some basic timelines, pull together the training. You can get the initial training by getting learning pathways. I'll include the link in the resources in this post, so you can go ahead and take a look at where I show how to set up learning pathways, how to customize it for your needs, how to do some training, customized for your needs in your org. But get them educated, get them trained, give them a reference back, publicize and do it each week, reminders, and do the countdown to file share, become reading only, then going bye-bye. And that's my take. Handle it that way. I understand there's other large repositories and things you may move, but again, those should be things that you're thinking proactively about, not just because it's all file shares, we're going to move it all up. So with that, I want to thank you for tuning in. This has been Michael Giannotti. You can learn more about Microsoft's modern workplace in healthcare and life sciences by going to our blog at aka.ms/HLS blog. That's aka.ms/HLS blog. This video, by the way, one of the tips I give in the whole learning pathways is using PowerPoint. That's all I did here. This video is created using Microsoft PowerPoint recording. Use it. It's great. It rocks. If you don't see it in there, just go in the very top of PowerPoint and type in recording, and you'll learn how to turn on the tab for PowerPoint recording so you can get it all set up. But with that, this is Michael Giannotti bidding you have a great day. Let us know how we can help you, thoughts, things that we can chime in on. But you have a great day. Take care, and as always, ciao.